it is wonderful to see so many people from so many different eras of life at Bethel and family connections. So welcome everybody. I am Jen Stewart. I am Carol's niece. This is, who are you?
I'm David. One of her sons. Oh, can you hear me? Does it work?
Yeah.
Yeah, look at that.
Okay.
All right, we're in.
Cool. And this is?
Michelle Wingard. I'm a professor here, but also know these two.
Yeah, and help make this happen.
20 years.
Yeah, for a really long time.
So I'm gonna kind of, as requested, keep this on the rails, as David said. We've got an artist here and then somebody who teaches on a daily basis, so we'll keep it on the rails. But I thought I would just share a little bit about how this event came together. One of the things that Rhonda Gilbraith shared this morning when we stopped in is that since Carol passed away, she felt that it would be so wonderful to have a presence of Carol in the library in the form of a painting. So that is part of what is the occasion here, to kind of recognize the installation of that beautiful piece that you saw on your way in. And then along with that, as many of you may know, Carol does not have a final resting place. And so part of what we want to do is recognize her many, many years spent here on this campus in the planting of a tree in her memory. So we're going to start with a little bit of conversation around Carol's legacy here in the library, her legacy in our family as a sort of a lover of art and literature, talk a little bit about David's work. And then when we're finished, we'll spend a little time here just conversing and then make our way down to this, the path between here and the seminary where they were able to install a tree yesterday. So that's kind of how we're going to take our day today. But I'd like to start off with, I think, having Rhonda talk a little bit about Carol's contributions to Bethel and to the library that we are in now.
Thank you, Jen. Well, this is so lovely. My name is Rhonda Gilbraith. I'm the Associate Director of the Library and Collection Development Librarian. And I want to share with you some things about Carol, who was for many years a friend and colleague of mine here in the library. So first of all, you need to forget any of those old and flattering librarian stereotypes when you think of Carol. Carol had what I consider to be an ideal librarian temperament. She was warm, welcoming, funny, encouraging, and very smart, but in a way that was always entirely relatable and approachable. She was colorful and vibrant, full of life and laughter, and she had a great capacity for joy and wonder. The universe delighted Carol. She was completely comfortable in a classroom, talking off the cuff, unlike others of us. And she was skilled at answering all kinds of library patron questions way pre-internet. She was also this library's collection development librarian. I learned at her side. The person who directed the shape and scope of the library's collections. Part of why she was so good at that was that she engaged with the world around her so openly. She was deeply and genuinely curious. She was always reading, learning, and exploring. But this is an important point. Much of her learning was drawn from the many and varied people who were in her orbit. And there were many, many of those. The Hansen family lives and breathes creativity, as many of you can attest. So it's not at all surprising that Carol was always an art lover. In fact, she confided in me that she played a little favoritism with the art department, devoting an extra measure of her time and even library budget to a program that she loved and admired. Our library's continued close collaboration with the art department is in part an extension of that legacy of Carol's. Carol was very proud of her beloved guys, Larry, Chris, and David, and she frequently talked about their many creative endeavors, the music, the photography, the videos and slideshows, the building, and the painting. I knew about David's Parsons design adventures when she and Larry were trying to figure out the logistics of how to swing his transfer from Bethel to Parsons in New York City. She shared with me what she called a Hansen family mantra, "We'll figure it out." This can-do creative spirit carried through in her work as well as in her personal life. She was a natural optimist, while at the same time being a realist. I'm not sure how she managed that, but she did, even when her challenges were so great. But having said that, I guess I know how she did that, at least in part, and that in addition to her many other qualities, she had a very strong, immovable faith. Carol loved David's art and frequently talked about it. I remember especially her love of his luminous colors. And since Carol's passing, I've thought about how much it would mean to Carol and to this library to have one of David's pieces in the place where she invested so much of herself. This painting that so beautifully reflects her essence is the fulfillment of that dream.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. So I think part of what I am here to contribute along with David's painting is to talk a little bit about, obviously Carol was a librarian, a keeper of words and language, and so when David and I were talking about how we might put something like this together, he asked me to read a little bit of my poetry. And one of the cool stories that I want to tell before I read a little bit is that David and Michelle here have been friends for how long? Like ever?
20 years?
96. 1996.
Long time.
And Michelle and I were here at Bethel at the same time from 1996 to 2000. Never met her even one time. And I always heard from David through the years, Matt and Michelle, my friends Matt and Michelle. No idea who Michelle was. So last summer, I was at a conference for writers and artists in Seattle. And up on stage was Michelle talking about the Christians in the Visual Arts organization. And we got to chatting at a reception later that evening. And I said, I noticed you were an art professor at Bethel. I said, I went there. She said, oh, when did you go? We did the whole, we went, oh my gosh, we were there at the same time. And I said, yeah, my aunt Carol was the librarian there. She's like, Carol Hansen? Are you David Hansen's cousin? I'm like, yes. So we put this wonderful thing together. And almost immediately, we started talking about this event and how the desire to recognize Carol and to honor her contributions and her influence on really our lives and our commitment to creativity and creative practice comes from Carol's influence. So I just wanted to tell that story because I think it's just part of how this has been orchestrated.
Because I've been trying to do a tree thing for so long, and then it was like, it's like between Carol and God getting in the mix, it was like suddenly it all started happening, and I'm getting photos of the two of you together. I was like, what is happening?
We were at so we took a snap and sent it to David, and I think blew your mind. So that I meant to say that at the beginning. Yeah. So in our home, and I'm sure my dad who's here can attest, Carol has been the person who introduces us to the beautiful creative things of the world. I remember Dad telling a story of Carol sneaking records into Grandma and Grandpa's house in the 60s, like records that maybe Grandma and Grandpa wouldn't have necessarily approved of, to share this music with the family. And so my experience when I came to Bethel as a freshman was spending time in their home and beginning to inculcate what it feels like to live with art and to live artfully, and the house just full of books and paintings on the wall that are done by people that are in their family, beautiful prints that are paintings that Hansen had done, and just this sense that art is not something that you put into a museum and kind of look at, but you put it on the walls, you walk around in it, and you sort of you make creative living part of your everyday. This also manifested in the many different dishes that she had for different occasions. You would make the table. How many sets of dishes did we find in her house?
Way too many.
It was a lot. I think I have 2 of them now. So just the idea that you would set a table artfully, that you would match things, and that sense that beauty is important began to make its way, I think, to build on what I already had, but to expand that. So I am going to read a little bit of a poem. I'll read a poem that I think is something that I've carried into my life in raising my boys. I have 2 boys. They're named after Carol's boys, and they're the same distance apart in age as Carol's boys. So I'm going to read a poem that is in my book called Madonna Complex, and it's about taking my son to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. when he was about 8 months old. And I want to read it because I think it is a sense to me of how Carol conducted her life and how she shared art with, with everyone around her. So this is called Taking the Baby to See Rothko at the National Gallery. 15 minutes before closing seems like more time than we'll need to see all there is to see in Rothko's blocks of color, the hungry purples gnawing on their canvases, the primal reds. The baby likes the moving walkway, mobiles, flickering lights, the blueberry rooster crowing at the city from the roof. I assume abstract expressionists will be a bit beyond his comprehension, forgetting that their art stripped down to form, to rectangle and red, to line and lack. But when his eager babbles echo off the surfaces in Rothko's room, I see he understands it more than I do. Pre-verbal, full of awe, himself another masterpiece of bright, unsayable things.
Yes. That's a good point.
So do you guys want to talk a little bit about your painting, David?
Well, sure. So I'm going to give a little bit of a context for what this painting is becoming part of, which I have to say I didn't really know Carol. I met her like at your house when we were like in our 20s. So it's been interesting to discover that so much of the legacy of the art that lives on the walls and in our spaces, the art books that we teach from, are so much connected to Carol. Mm-hmm. And that's really powerful to know that or realize that. So I'm the gallery director here at Bethel. I'm also in charge of our permanent collection. So Bethel has a permanent collection of thousands of original artworks by artists that are everywhere from Wendy Redstar over there, Betty Woodman, Dale Johnson, Cameron Booth, and David Lynn Hansen, who was just recently added to our collection. But a big part of, as you walk through the spaces of the Bethel campus, we have art. Real art in all of our spaces. And I think some of that is very much connected to what Jen was talking about, this idea that living with real art matters here. It matters to us here. And I think that having a representation of David's new work, which is such a dramatic departure from the black and whites that you were doing in like the late 2000s? Yeah,
and even the colorful ones before, the multi-narrative, sort of more topical,
like
geopolitical, etc. paintings.
So David's earlier work that I know is black and white. It has these kind of precarious forms, this line work that has an intensity to it. And so when we started talking with David about acquiring something to honor Carol for the library, David sent us some options, and this was one of them. Mm-hmm. And so for me personally, it was kind of surprising because I had seen some of David's textile work and some of the work that you had done at J. Crew, and this felt like such an interesting departure from where you had been. And I wondered if you could talk about how you got here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a little bit less intellectual than some of the other kinds of work that I have done in the past where, in truth, spending so much time as a textile designer, there's always a tension between form and line and whether or not I want something to be very flat or if I want to try to create some semblance of dimension. These particular paintings, it's sort of a more personal story, but several years ago, I got really, really sick. I was in the middle of working on 5 other paintings at the time that are all sitting now somewhere else, but I ended up having an incredibly bad fever, and I don't know, it just went to darkness. And before this, for several years, people would ask me, oh, has Carol come to you? Have you seen her in things? And I'm like, no. The last 10 years of her life were awful. Like, I want her to be anywhere else, like be in heaven, like tap dancing in the golden streets and don't be here. And suddenly I'm having this just intense fever dream, basically, and I'm in this just complete blackness, and then all these colors just start forming and showing up. And I'm just walking, and she's walking next to me. And I looked over, and I can't remember if I said something, or I think I tried to say something, and she just looked at me and smiled and kept walking. And we just walked for all through these different insane, just wild visions of what. And I also, and it might just be, psychologically speaking, I think that, she loves when I paint landscapes, and I think in my heart, I'm a landscape painter. Even the things that are, totally wacky and talking about all kinds of different things, I think they all end up falling into one way or the other into a landscape category. And I've woke up from this, and I was just like, this is what I want to think about now. Like, I want to think about where that was. Not that I'll ever be able to attain that space again, but also think about how I can interpret it in a way that makes sense, or, because I find that in my life, the difference between illustration and fine art is that illustration tells you what you're looking at. It says, this is what it is. This is a pine tree, or this is a can of soup, whatever it is. And in a lot of ways, fine art kind of asks you more questions than you ask it. And I want to try to find a way to make something as simple as, this radical landscape that I spent time in. And in so many different forms, like try to find a way to make that make sense on a canvas and not just be a straightforward, here's a landscape from Eden Prairie. Like this is like it's more like difficult to talk about because it's like more of a sort of deeply psychological landscape than it is a physical landscape.
Do you feel like the way that you are doing mark making in this particular painting or these series of paintings, I feel it having like a different, more painterly language rather than the more drawing language that some of the other landscapes were considering. Where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes, I think in a lot of ways it's a return to the way I painted a long time ago. Because the black and white ones that you're talking about, so what happened is that my dad, mom, and I, with her father, all went to Alaska. And I was making sketches that felt similar to those black and white ones, but what I was still doing were, if you remember, the sort of a lot of translucence, transparent layers, and there's a lot of architectural elements and big expressive floral things happening within that. And then after her accident, I moved back to Minnesota, and I left everything in New York. And so I got back to Minnesota, and I had this little chest that my parents had kept in my room/studio, and I literally just had 40 different things of black ink and a couple red ones. And so I just started painting those from the sketches, and it just went in its own direction and became its own thing and had its own life, and it became what I was doing. And I think in a lot of ways, whatever happened in that space in my head or in heaven with her or wherever it was, is a dramatic shift away from that back to, and I think part of it too is, and it's a bit personal, but it's sort of like, I think that in a lot of ways, like as Jen's talking about, like a lot of the artwork and things like kind of flows through her, and that's why my brother is such an incredible musician, and why I like painting and things like that. It's just because we were fostered and given that, and it's like when she left, it was kind of like, who am I impressing anymore with this? Yeah, on some level, it was like, do I just go all the way in on textile design, and that's what I do now? I'm painting, maybe, maybe not. Like it's a funny psychological thing to think about, but I think it really made me realize that as much as I love textile and I love that language, I'm really missing this thing that I used to really make, I think, on some level to like, I don't know, not show off, but just sort of like show up in a different way. And so that's, I think, I don't know if that answers your question. I think I'm just babbling.
I forgot what the question was. It was great.
So I have another thought about the way that you're doing mark making. It feels like a space that one wants to inhabit. Like this feels like a space that's somewhat dreamlike, but it does feel like a place that there's rest and there's kind of a visual complexity to it, but at the same time, it's kind of soothing to look at. And I think there is that like landscape aspect of it. So I'm excited that we have this in the library, and I'm also interested in this idea that not only do we have a landscape dedicated to Carol in the library, but we're going to have a tree in the landscape also. But then it's right next to the water. There's water here as well. There's just kind of like all of these overlaps. And I'm wondering, were you thinking about the tree during the time that you were making the painting?
So, I mean, I've thought about that tree because, I mean, what Carol did was a very brave thing, right? She gave her body to science. And she did that so that the next person who injures themselves the way that she had will have a better chance. And so we don't have a marker. And so the tree isn't something that I thought of really with painting until you told me she was getting a tree. And now I have a bunch of paintings that have sort of this like huge tree. Laurel's probably the only one that knows about it. But when I was making these, I was just a guy trying to get a tree planted somewhere in a yard. So it wasn't, I didn't know if it was ever going to be real. So, and yeah, and I mean, once we got this, I mean, this is unexpected. It's a super huge honor to have a painting where my mother spent all of her life, and this wasn't part of the plan. The plan was like a tree, and then maybe Chris and Dad and I and a few people would go stand and, you know, plant it, but this is very wild, and a lot of lovers of Carol out here. And it's really, I'm just really happy that this all turned out the way that it did. But no, I wasn't thinking about that tree when these were happening.
Do you want to talk about the tree? Now that we have this painting here, we have this space that is now officially dedicated or will be dedicated.
It just makes me happy. And it makes me happy that I know for a moment there was a conversation about whether or not we could actually get it done. And then we were going to commandeer a different tree and just say, that's her tree. and I think I really want Lynn to come paint this tree like every year, because as it gets bigger, it's just going to, he's the reason I love landscape painting, really. And I'm just so excited about it. So I came here yesterday when they planted it, and I just sort of thought, what if maybe they're planting it? So I just drove in, and there they were, like, just getting ready to plant it. And I was talking to you, and then I'm running because they were, like, getting out of the truck.
Well, the best thing you said on your way in was, like, I'm just going to, like, make some plaques and put them in all the trees for Carol.
Yeah.
Where's Waldo tree?
Which, I mean, I did that when I was like a freshman or sophomore in college. I made plaques that said in loving memory of David Lynn Hansen and put them I like different things. But I can do it again.
If I can pop in here, I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about what I'm hearing in obviously the desire to have a sense of permanence and like a permanent marker. And when we were talking about this event, and the title that Anne has given it is Legacy, Remembrance, and Making. And it brought to mind, there was a while when you were making art that you showed me that was this ink that would eventually fade.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, during the time that she was sort of really struggling towards the end of her life, or possibly right after she had passed away. And we had a conversation about you were working on trying to learn what it was like to make beautiful things with the knowledge that they would eventually fade. Fade. And so I'm just listening to you talk about this, and I was thinking a little about, again, sort of in preparation for this event, that the role that art plays in that process of negotiating how to hold on to something at the same time that you are letting go of something. Yeah. And I just think that this combination of a tree that is a living thing that will grow and bloom and blossom and then decline is so wonderful to put in there as a temporary permanence.
Yeah, no,
and then
absolutely.
Alongside it, then we have the art piece, which can also hold a level of permanence. Anyway, this is something I've been interested in your work.
The ink, messing with the ink to make it so that it would fade over time was exactly about that. Right?
Yeah.
It was about this sort of temporal, like, it doesn't matter how good or whatever it is, something's going to happen. And if it's a tree, like, I just want it to live long enough that I can sit under it and read books once in a while. I can Conlin in a painting with me out in the field.
I already see it.
Yeah, we're going to be out there. And I mean, and that said, my wife made me repaint like 2 of those because she was like, she's like, I don't like how this is fading. This is not working for me mentally. She's like, you're going to fix that. I was like, all right. But I still have a bunch of them, and I think that that's part of the thing with the tree. When we were talking about it, the groundsmen were like, well, I mean, trees can die. And I was like, well, then we'll plant another one there. That's her spot. And it's a really beautiful, wonderful spot. Like, they really gave her some, like, because I would have been fine if it was in the forest and I knew where it was. Or they were like, it's, I don't know, by the freshman dorms. But this is like, they gave it this really lovely place in space on the campus. And I'm really excited that it'll be there and grow. And if it gets a Crimson King disease, then we'll put another one there. That's, I mean, I hope this one goes. But it is that. It is that it's not a permanent market, because what is permanence? Like 4 generations down, you know, who's going back there and looking at this rock and saying,
Yeah. Did I ever tell you that I wrote a poem about the fading ink thing?
No.
Can I read you the poem?
Oh, no.
I won't make you cry. So we had this conversation about the poem that's on the wall next to the painting.
She doesn't get to read it.
And I said, I will not read it because it will destroy us all. And so you can read that at your leisure. I said, we'll talk about it and we'll talk around.
You can read it by the tree. You just can't read it until I'm done talking.
But you know, I've tried to kind of get a lot in there. But we had a conversation about, you know, trying to make something for someone and feeling like it's just, I don't particularly think that's a particularly good poem. I wanted it to be so much better than it is. And then I brought to mind this earlier poem that I had made in response to your fading ink movement that you were having, which I thought I would read, which is not going to break you, I don't think. Right. But because I think
I'm fragile.
no,
go. Please do.
So the painter in here is you, and I felt like it was just a good one to kind of muse on this idea of, you know, what it is we're trying to do with an event like this, or with putting a tree in the ground or hanging a painting on the wall. You know, what is this about? How does this help us? How does this help us live in a particular way? So this is just called Fading. The painter says he used a fading ink to learn the way to labor over a beauty that will not last, to give effort and attention to the way a leaf unfolds, the shape of a shell knot, a finger unclenching, the brush, the pen, details the scroll so that it is the motion that matters, not the thing. So it is the attention that consecrates the object it attends. The way we fill 1,000 journals with a phrase, a thought, a little sketch of roses, a tower, or a gently curving fence, the half lines of a gravestone's epigraph. We tuck them in our sack, rarely reread, but there to carry our lives in little scribblings. The making is what matters. The song matters less than the singing.
Awesome. I love that.
That's for you.
That's a great last line. I love that last line.
You can have it.
I think it's kind of interesting that you talk about this idea of attention. And when we think about David's painting and we think about this tree, in a way, they are a means of marking space to honor an absence, so a presence to stand in place. And I think that there's something interesting in thinking about these things, whether it be a headstone or a painting or this tree, being a place for attention. But I also think it's really interesting, because I do think we often think about these objects, objects of memory, as being the end point or the thing that we go to. But really, if we think about all of the people in this space, we're all carrying some way that Carol influenced our lives.
Absolutely.
And even the way you talked about the painting, which I'm leery of saying this because I don't want you to cry or me
no,
to,
you
or
can't.
Me to cry. But you had kind of talked a little bit about making the painting as being almost like this collaborative effort.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you feel like you could talk about that? Because that was like really powerful to me to think about the way that she's still influencing the way that you're making work.
Yeah, she is. It's funny. You know, it reminds me of another very quick aside story that I was telling Laurel's parents. Years and years and years ago, when I was in the middle of nowhere, Ireland, and I heard this couple sitting there talking by the bar. And I went up and I said, "Oh, are you American? You sound kind of Minnesotan." And it turns out one went to McAllister, one went to Bethel. And they found out who Carol was. Because they were like, "Well, how do you know that?" I was like, "My mom's librarian there." And they're like, "Carol Hansen?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they were like, neither of us would have graduated without her. And it's like, talk about making a mark. You know what I mean? It's like in the middle of nowhere on the other side of the world, here's like a couple that both she's helped them actually get out of college and out of their life. But I think the collaborative effort of it is, I think, because it got me thinking again of sort of the aesthetic territories that she appreciated, because she had a very sophisticated way of looking at art and thinking about art and talking about art. And I think that I'd sort of just blocked that and gotten to myself, in a sense, not just in a technical way, but in a sort of I don't know, spiritual way, like locked out, because I was just working on things that, it was like, if I do this technical thing, I don't have to actually express anything. I don't have to I don't have to like paint the way that I actually like to look at paintings. I can just do this thing technical, and then I have, you know, a job where everything is very technical, and I can not have to face this other thing that's hard, you know. And I feel like there is this part of me that feels like this is the thing that she would be wanting me to do, and like the way she'd want me to explore it. And so there is that feeling while I'm doing it. Even when I'm making like a clunker of a painting, and I'm like, I know that this isn't working right now. I'm like, all right, but it's not just me. We're in this together, in a sense. So that is. I mean, it's not the most profound thing I ever said, but it is the way I feel with this new group of work that I've been doing, and that I may be stuck in for the rest of my life, and I'll be okay with it.
I think it's really striking to think about these things as like a way of putting your attention on canvas.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really lovely.
Thank you. How are we doing?
You're good.
How are we
Do
doing?
you have any more questions?
I just know that I can like ramble, and I'm trying really hard to like.
I said I'm gonna keep you on the rails.
Rein it in.
I mean, that's all I have for the painting aspect of things, but I know there's many more things to be said, and maybe instructions for the tree.
Yeah, so we kind of wanted to just like have this conversation and talk a bit about Carol's legacy, but we also wanted to make some space in this, you know, sort of short time that we have for the lovely gathering of friends and people from all over. So we want to make sure that there is time to spend doing that. The Friends of the Library have put together a really nice little sort of spread for us, so we want to give time to enjoy that. And then after a little while, should we put like a time marker at which point we'll head down to the tree? Those of you who would like to, it's just going to be like all the way down the building and then out and then up towards the seminary. We can all kind of convene there for sort of like part two, but also just a little bit more informal in that space.
Yeah, just kind of maybe one big parade.
We can do a parade. So
I like that.
All
Conga
right.
line.
When David starts to conga, we will follow him down. So Rhonda or neither of those.
Conga.
Conga. Rhonda, do you want to sort of wrap us up here? We really, really appreciate. Thank you to the Friends of the Library, to the Bethel Library
Thank you guys
for having us.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you very much.
So instrumental.
Thank you so much for all of you who made your way here. Thank you so much for creating these beautiful works and for sharing them with us. As Jen said, there are refreshments here, and so please help yourself. We're going to be taking down some of the seating in this area so you have room to circulate, and we would ask if you could move in this direction with your food and your conversations. We do have a class that's going to be using the things on that shelf where the food is. And what time is it?
So just about 2.
But what time are they? It's 2:10. But the class? 2:10. Oh, okay. All right, so if you could do that, get your food in this direction, then they will be able to access the things that they're going to be using for the class. So thank you again so much.
Thank you so much, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Everybody.